Today's second anniversary episode of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards continues to take us inside one of the most bizarre and heartbreaking modern spiritual movements you've probably never heard of. Until now. My guest is Andrew Ryan Profaci, who once lived at the center of Love Has Won, a controversial spiritual group led by the self-proclaimed deity Amy Carlson, known to followers as Mother God. Andrew wasn't just a believer. He was chosen by Carlson herself as Father God, her closest spiritual and romantic partner. This is a story about awakening, not in the cosmic sense, but in the deeply human one. It's about reclaiming your voice and your right to live free.
When I really began my awakening in 2013, 2014, I started looking into spirituality, conspiracy theories as well. I had a really curious mind when it came to reality and the nature of life. I felt like conspiracy theories played a large role in my awakening because they kind of, pointed to the fact, or the idea at least, the belief that life isn't quite as black and white as maybe we think, that there's more here to be found if you want to find it. And it kind of opened me up to this path of seeking. And unfortunately, conspiracy theories had started to crash my worldview in a lot of ways because I really had gotten carried away with them.
Let's join the finale of this two-part series of this gripping conversation with Andrew Ryan Profaci.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
This is part 2 of this conversation with former Love Has Won member Andrew Ryan Profaci.
But do you think people are more vulnerable to cults when they're spiritually hungry or emotionally wounded?
Great question. I believe it takes a little bit of both. I don't think you would find yourself in a cult if you didn't have a little bit of both of those. I think they're both important ingredients. Although, I don't think any of us is really 100% complete without either of them. And that's just life itself. Life can be tragic. Life, isn't easy. And it isn't, all rainbows and sunshine, unfortunately. And we all have that in common, that we all have challenges. What causes a person to be more susceptible towards joining a cult? I think, again, I go back to the conspiracy theories. I really think they play a much bigger role than many people realize in one, destroying a belief system, creating an opportunity for it to be rebuilt in somebody else's image, or at least to cut away from reality and isolate yourself into this bubble of belief where, belief becomes truth, where belief becomes reality, and you stop making that distinction. It's a great question. I don't know if any of us, I don't know who is qualified to answer. I don't know.
Okay. So did being in that group affect your own identity or self-worth?
Oh, yeah, sure. I destroyed it at first. And in a good way, I look at it as a positive thing now. It kind of, allowed me to rebuild from scratch in a sense, and to put it all together, to ask myself, all of the questions that somebody asks themselves when you try to figure out, who am I? Who do I want to be? What do my experiences mean? What do my desires mean for who I am? What effect do they have? Am I a good person? And, all these kinds of questions, and I look back on it as a positive experience. And I'm glad that my identity was crashed and destroyed in the way it was, but only because I had found the strength to rebuild it. Unfortunately, it's not true for everybody. And there are a lot of people who, have a lot of lasting damage that is done to them. And, I'm sure I'm still damaged in a lot of ways. I'm not a perfect person, but I've made the best of it in a lot of ways that I'm grateful for. That, I hope other people who have these kinds of experiences will attain that same kind of feeling, as far as feeling like they've processed and overcome and turned, a tough situation into the best it could potentially be.
Okay. Have you worked with any kind of a therapist or a spiritual mentor in your recovery? And if so, what's helped you the most?
So, not really like a spiritual mentor, although I've had, a couple of friends who I guess have become something like that. I have done lots of therapy, especially with the cancer. That became an important thing. With the cancer, when you're 40 years old with stage 4 cancer, therapy is important. But the best therapy at the end of the day for me was writing my book, was sitting down in a dispassionate place and having to relive the experiences and, the old feelings welling up and looking at it from that dispassionate viewpoint, not foggy eyed like I was in the middle of the experience when it was happening, but with, hindsight and clarity, from a level-headed place. And it was writing the book that really helped me to process everything. That was the best therapy of them all.
So how did trauma show up in your body or mind even after the group was gone?
It's an interesting question. Addiction for sure. Falling back into the opiate addiction that had, started from after my car accident, back in 2002. They put an 18-year-old kid on painkillers all day long for, a year and a half, and then just pulled them. There was no recovery. There was no, I didn't know what withdrawal was until I went through it the first time. Doctors didn't even tell me what to expect. There was none of that. And I had overcome it before I joined the group. And after it, I've fallen back into that place. How much of it you want to, blame, for a lack of better terms, on the experience, or me just making bad decisions, I can't say. That's so subjective. It's hard to, pinpoint. But if it showed up, it was there. And in the body, I think it's a great question, something to ponder as far as the potential for energy, science, metaphysics, for thoughts to create a physical discomfort, to create potential for something like disease, cancer even.
That was actually what I was thinking of, wondering if cancer could have been a trauma response.
Sure. These are things that I think about, and I find them fascinating. Do I have the answers? No, obviously. But there's a lot of interesting scientific theories and even a little bit of, scientific, I don't want to say proof, but, there's some evidence, that could potentially explain a theory that, it's possible for a thought to manifest into disease. So, I think that's a really interesting topic.
Okay. So were there ever any moments when you doubted your decision to leave and thought about going back?
No. No, I overstayed my welcome. I overstayed my welcome by probably 4 months when I was with the team. When I left, I was very happy with the decision. I was in a really good place. At least I thought I was in such a good place that I was so fearless that I used drugs again and got caught up in my addiction. Like I went so high that I lost control and I didn't stay even keeled. But to answer your question, no, I didn't feel like I missed it. There were a lot of great times. I mean, when you're living with people for, the better part of 9-10 months, you're going to have moments that you look back on fondly, just very human moments, laughing, talking, chatting, going out and experiencing something together with other human beings, the cult aside, the belief system aside. That was great, but I left the team because Amy had moved on from me. She had seen a shiny new toy, and I wasn't able to be Father God anymore because I was doing what I could on a daily basis to dismantle the belief system and snap her out of it. So somebody else had to come and be Father God, and she set her sights on a new guy, and she wanted to keep our relationship going while telling me that she was this new person who was going to become Father God, was just going to have the title, but she wasn't going to have a physical relationship with him. But she had a promiscuous nature to her. And, it was just very difficult for me to balance that and to stay. And I eventually made the decision to leave because it was hard to watch, somebody who I had dedicated myself to slipping away right in front of me, literally. I mean, I had to actually watch it with my own eyes. Wow. As if your own woman was cuddling up with a new man, and that was painful to see. And I decided not to have that experience anymore, and that's why I left. So, and she actually 3 weeks later left the team out of nowhere. Didn't see it coming. I talk about it in my book. She messaged me and says, "I'm being guided to join you. I want to leave the team behind, and I want to come and be with you." And she actually left the team behind, and we can go there if you want, and came and stayed with me for a couple months. But when she couldn't and didn't leave it behind like she promised, then I ended things for good. And in that moment, I walked away and I never looked back. And I didn't miss it. I really didn't miss it. I just moved on.
Wow. So knowing the group, the team, as you call them, called her mom and called the Father God Dad, what were they calling you and this other guy when this transition was going on?
Yeah, so my name had become, at one point, it was like, it started as Andrew and then became Father God, and people would just call me FG.
That's true. An informal relationship with Father God.
and then it became then I became Archangel Lucifer. She told me was who I was, the light bearer that history had incorrectly defined him, and that yes, he had gone astray, but he had redeemed himself.
He had some flaws, but but he was still an archangel.
Yeah, and so people, for a while they called me Lucy, short for Lucifer.
Wow.
And by the time I left, I was Andrew again. And in the transition, it was funny. For a while, I almost fought for the title. I wanted to be Father God because I know what it meant to her. As far as, in this bubble, like it's a screen name, not fighting to be because I think I'm God, but, fighting for the title because of, one, the hierarchy of the team itself, and two, because, Amy was in a relationship with me. We were together. So to have somebody else come step in and take the name Father God while she was Mother God is, kind of like ushering me out the back door. That there was a little bit of resistance there for sure. That was a difficult thing to go through at the time. But it all ended up, for the best, in the long run, no doubt. But, the names and the titles were, like I said, it was like playing this cosmic game of house inside this little bubble. You didn't really think about what the names meant. And, you look back on it now and, you realize how, obviously ridiculous it is, just put that aside. It's not clearly like beyond that, but I kind of find interest in looking at how my beliefs had been shaped and formed to a place where I was even, willing or subjective enough to even take that on or agree with it. I find it really fascinating to think about and to ponder. But at the end of the day, the names were just, I guess, indicative of.
It's like in my mind, my songs, I have a soundtrack going through my brain all the time, even when I'm asleep. So any word here or there might trigger a certain song lyric to pop up. And when you just said that, I was thinking of Bon Jovi. And being from New Jersey, you could probably appreciate that. It's all the same, only the names have changed. So that was you. You were still the same, but your name changed several times while you were there. Yeah. Several name changes throughout. I think I went by Lucy more than everything. I was more comfortable with that than I was FG. That was never something that I was ever really comfortable with. I don't think, that title ever was said in relation to me in a moment where I didn't just really get the creeps. Looking back at how you kind of tried to balance it and just get through it again, it was such a strange, unique experience to be in, really fascinating in so many ways. But, I have the luxury of saying that because I find myself in a good place. I consider myself to be in a good place right now. And unfortunately, that's not the case for everybody. So I recognize that, it's not all fun and games either. These things can really do a lot of damage too. So did that experience with Amy affect how you approach romantic relationships now? Yeah, sure. I mean, just in the same way, the process of any experience will affect the experiences that come after it in the sense of learning. There wasn't anything in particular that made it unique in that way. It was actually our relationship was very human, which is why I, grew to care about her as much as I did, was because I saw the real person and our relationship was normal. Like other relationships I had in the past. It wasn't very different in that way. But sure, I learned a lot about it. She was actually more closed off than a lot of people when it came to talking about her past. She didn't like to go there. She just liked to live in the present moment, as she would say. It was kind of, that was kind of her thing. She never really wanted to open up about her past. But other than that, it was pretty normal. So what was it like trying to reconnect with friends and family after you left the group? And did they understand what you had been through? And I don't know if anybody could ever truly understand, what you had been through. You can tell them, and they get an idea. But coming back was more like, my family was happy to see that I hadn't, been completely lost or completely broken. That I wasn't a completely different person when I came back. That I felt like the same person. I talked like the same person, and I seemed to be the same person. And in a lot of ways, I was. My beliefs had definitely evolved through that experience, but I kind of
came full circle. I would say full spiral, because I wasn't in the same place, even though it looked similar. Everything had kind of evolved a little bit. I think my family was just happy that I was still Andrew. And at the end of the day, it was more about, just we laughed it off and let it go.
Speaking of laughing it off, do any of them ever just jokingly refer to you as Father God or Lucifer?
No. And I hope they never do. But I had a boss that would tease me once in a while. That would call me that once in a while because he thought it was fun. And I'd get those same chills every time. But from the family, no, not so much. But from a couple other people, I've had that happen, sure.
All right, so my flash assessment here is that you don't have an older brother.
I do.
You do, and he doesn't tease you by calling you Father God.
No, my brother, he's a year older than me. No, he's not the type to tease another person. And, I think he understands that I went and, did something that was, extreme and crazy. He actually refers to it as the spaceship beep boop experience.
That's pretty cool.
And, so, he'll talk about the spaceship beep boop people, and we have this chat on my phone with all of my cousins, and he renamed the name of the chat where we all text each other. The chat name is Spaceship Beep Boop, as an ode to me. So I guess as far as my brother's teasing, that's the extent of it.
That's pretty funny. That is really funny. So you've been featured in documentaries, news reports, and podcasts like this one. Has that media attention been healing or exhausting for you?
Healing more than anything. Definitely healing, because by asking the questions and they're doing the reflection, just like I said earlier, the first time I was really interviewed about it, I said that I didn't think it was a cult when I had first joined, but I don't believe that anymore because of, my reflections and considering everything and really looking at it in new ways and new perspectives. I've continued to evolve and to learn and to grow. So I would consider the interview experience to be far more cathartic than it is exhausting.
All right. So how do you balance telling your story with living your life?
It's a great question, but they're one and the same. It's not something that I obviously want to lead with. You meet a girl, it's not something that you lead with, right?
Probably won't leave that out of your dating profile if you go on.
But at the same time, you can't search my name and find anything but. So the balancing, it's there. It's a part of me. It's a part of my experience. Make the best of it. That's all I can do is make the best of it. And it'll serve me. If, for example, meet a girl, she gets turned off by the fact that she did a Google search and finds all this stuff about love has won, which probably did me a favor, because in the long run, it probably wasn't going to work out anyway. If that was a person who, is willing to move on from me just because of those past experiences. And it's probably not somebody in the long run that I, would find myself having a successful relationship with. So although maybe I shouldn't say that because I'm 40 years old and I'm single.
So is that the most surprising response you've received from someone who heard your story?
I've had two girlfriends who had only brought it up when we got into a fight and used it to cut, like a knife, to try to stab me with. unfortunately for them, that knife has been blunted long ago. And it doesn't really cut, it's not comfortable, but, those marks, those scars, or those cuts have been scarred over and, healed over so much that, the worst of it has been brought up in, moments in a argument with a girlfriend. And, she brings up, my past in a way that's, intended to hurt me. That's probably been the worst of it. So, as far as somebody bringing it up in that way.
Okay. So if you could speak to your younger self, let's say 6 months before you left to join Love Is One, what would you say to yourself?
Wow. That is one of the best questions I've ever been asked.
Take as much time as you need to think about it.
I'll think out loud.
Okay.
Because do I take the experience away from myself, knowing how much I grew from it? At the same time, I can't define how much damage it really did because it's subjective, right? Mm-hmm. Who knows where my life would have been had I not joined the group? I would have been looking for a new job because I had been let go of my job a couple of months earlier. I probably would have found another job doing a similar thing because I had opportunities for similar companies that were interested in me. I would have been making the same amount of money. Maybe I work my way up. And maybe 10 years later, I find myself in a corporate job making, more money than I'm making right in this moment. And, life works out great. But maybe I don't learn about myself. Maybe I don't learn so much, or at least so deeply. I learned, some unique, I was forced to ask myself such unique questions when it came to processing that experience. And looking back on it, it's just so unique that it's hard to think that I would have gotten as much value not going if we're talking emotional and mental growth for somebody who's interested in seeking and who understands that the corporeal accumulation of wealth means nothing at the end of the day. Literally will mean nothing. I mean, unless you're somebody who wants to be buried with your gold. But it's still, I don't think it goes with you. And in that sense, as somebody who looked at cancer in the face at 40 years old, looked death in the face, I don't think I would have been able to handle the cancer as well if I didn't know myself to the extreme extent that experience required me to learn about myself. And in that way, I think it was a saving grace. But your question is phenomenal. I appreciate you asking it, and I'm going to be considering it a lot more because it's a great question, but who knows?
Okay, I can appreciate that answer. Thank you.
Yeah,
do you consider yourself
Thank you.
a survivor, a teacher, an advocate, or something else entirely?
Yeah. What do you do with the experience? I feel there's value there. Definitely. I think there's value in the experience. I think there's a value in speaking out, especially as somebody who, my intentions are so, like, when I think about doing interviews, I think about how much goodness I can share with the world through my words and my experience. How can I bring as much value to the listener, to the audience, to you guys that are listening to me right now? How can I help you because of what I've gone through? And I think there's value in my experience, and I'm seeking it right now in this moment, trying to figure it out. But my intentions are to, speak about what I've gone through and bring that value out to whatever extent is possible. And, if I can help one person make this world a little bit brighter in any way, shape, or form, that's a win in my book. Otherwise, I don't know. If I didn't join, what am I doing? Working, trying to make as much money for myself as I can, having a family and taking care of them. That's a blessing. Nothing wrong with that as far as wanting to do the best for your family. But I see a lot of value in the growth emotionally that I've gotten from the experience. And I don't have a family. I would love to, have, been married and have kids by now. And, that wasn't my path. If maybe I would trade that for the love has won experience. Not to go back to your earlier question, it just popped in my mind, but maybe I would trade that. It's hard to say. I'm happy to be here, and I just want to bring the best of what I can out and bring it out to the world. And like I said, right now I'm reading a lot about Jesus Christ, and I think as far as role models go, I don't know if you could beat it.
Yeah.
So, for somebody who had, a pretty kick-butt, rebellious nature to him, if you look at it from that angle, and he did. I mean, he spoke truth to power, and he was unafraid about it. He didn't care what was thought about him. He wasn't worried about his image. He was worried about the image. And I think that's a pretty good thing to aim for.
Yeah, that's a pretty awesome description there. So let's talk about your cancer. So you mentioned having stage 4 cancer, and people hopefully there are a lot of people who haven't experienced cancer who haven't had a close family member experience it. Unfortunately, too many of us have experienced it. And stage 4 isn't a type of cancer. It's the level of severity of advancement of the cancer. And stage 4 is the highest level. So there's 1 through 4, and stage 4 is the level before the end. So
unless you're Amy and you had stage 5 cancer, which is something that she said to the world, but yes, you're right.
she was on another level. So you had stage 4 testicular cancer, I believe it was. So did that journey intersect at all with your spiritual recovery?
They're one and the same. They're one and the same. Unless you've gone through it, and I don't mean to single myself out in this way, but just to explain. Sitting in a hospital, I talk about it a little bit in my book. You hear wheels rolling, coming closer, and you see somebody, with their pole, with their IV bag, doing their laps, hunched over. Their body language just says surrender. And you're surrounded by people who are, at best, fighting for time. There's nothing about that experience that isn't spiritual. It's a difficult thing to go through. To see the look on somebody's face, most people would just be looking at the floor when they walk past your room. Sometimes people would look in and you catch eye contact for as long as it takes for them to walk past your doorway. Some people even try to crack a smile. But it's a really sad place to be. And there's, God is present in those buildings and in those people. in ways that I can't describe, because what you have to go through is so difficult in so many ways, physically, mentally, spiritually. I mean, that's the trifecta: mind, body, and soul. It takes all of them. And if you didn't have God in your life before you get to a place like that, I promise you, you'll find him real quick. Everything about that experience was spiritual. It was existential. The meaning of life, what's important. You know, what value have you brought? What are you leaving behind? You know, that's one of the reasons I wrote my book. I had this extremely unique experience. I experienced things that, no, I don't know what the percentage is. Probably more than 99% of people will never experience. So let me at least write a book about what I went through, keep it as factual as possible, and put it out there. Because maybe there's purpose in it. Maybe there's value. Maybe there's something there that's worth something to somebody. Because when you're stuck in hospital surrounded by people who are only fighting for time, for people who are looking at death in the eyes, knowing that they can't escape, you know, they're essentially playing a game of chicken that they know they're going to lose. The only question is how long it's going to take. You know, there's not much that I can think of that it would be more difficult or a more bitter pill to swallow than a slow, creeping, unavoidable death. And the fact that I sit here right now cancer-free, you know, for 18 months after being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, you know, I don't even feel worthy of being in that hospital, surrounded by these people who are fighting for time. You know, I was blessed to be still fighting for my life. Everybody else, they were dead men walking. There's nothing about that experience that doesn't encapsulate spirituality, mind, body, soul. It's the whole kit and caboodle.
Okay. So with your book, which is called The War on Love, we haven't mentioned that enough today. Make sure you go out and get a copy of Andrew's book, The War on Love.
TheWarOnLove.com. Yes, you can find it there. And Amazon. Thank you for the plug.
I'll definitely have links to in the show notes. But is the message of your book more of hope or kind of a warning?
I think you'll find what you're looking for. My intention was to be as factual as possible. The book, I wanted it to be a record. It was essentially written like a chronological record of my experience. Where I'm being subjective, it's obvious that I'm being subjective because I'm talking about my emotions. In other terms, it's very factual in the sense of this is the event, this is what happened this day, this is what was said, this is what this person did, and so on throughout my experience. Because I think by doing it that way, it's the purest way for me to express the experience. I express my emotions in the book. There's no doubt about it. And it's very clear when I'm doing so. But it's also very clear when I'm just stating the fact. And I think that's the best way for me to have put it out there. It was also the hardest way for me to write that book. Because I had to really look at everything head on, you know, and even keeled. And I think by doing it that way, you'll find whatever it is you're looking for. If you're looking for the trauma, you'll find it. If you're looking for the redemption and the growth, you'll find it. If you're looking to see the control mechanisms of a cult, you'll find it. if you're looking to find out who Amy Carlson was and who Mother God was and the difference between the two, you'll find it. And I think by writing the book in the fashion I did, it creates the most potential for it to serve as it possibly could.
So I know
if that makes sense.
You've been on a lot of podcasts recently. If you were to go out on like a speaking circuit, where would you most likely go to share this message? Would it be at a church? Would it be at a mental facility? Would it be at a cancer ward? Where would your story have the most resonance?
I think everywhere. Everybody is welcome in my story. I am you, you are me. That's how I see everybody I look at now, especially after the way you see people when you're in the seventh story of Memorial Sloan Kettering's Cancer Center in Manhattan. That's how you begin to see people, I think. And I think my story could be, something that you can connect with no matter who you are or where you're from. And I wouldn't leave anybody off the table. I hadn't thought about your question. I would love to speak more and, if to think that my voice and my experience was so valuable that people wanted me to come and talk to them.
You've got a lot to say. You've got a lot to say. I'm thankful you're here today. And just in general, but specifically to come and share your story with me, I really appreciate how honest and open and vulnerable you are. It means a lot. And I really am thankful that you are in a place of healing. And I hope that you continue to move in that direction.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm grateful that you've asked such thoughtful questions. I'm grateful that you've brought, the depth of emotion out of me, because I think that's really important. And this is the first interview that I've expressed it. And it's made me realize that my story was missing something. So you've given me a lot to think about today. But to think that there's a potential for people to be interested in my story so much that, they would gather in a place for me to come and talk. I mean, that feels like a successful life to me.
Well, in a certain way, podcasts are those community town halls. They're just a lot more spread out. Although they're not necessarily as unifying because they're individualistic. You're listening to it alone.
Yeah, but there are benefits and drawbacks if you want to look at them that way. But we have the ability to reach out across the globe, which I think is wonderful. But I don't get to reach out and shake your hand or give you a hug. So that's a drawback there too. But someday. But it's real, and I think that's what's important. It's real, and as you have, even named your podcast, that's what it's about. It's a real life.
Well, as a final question, I always ask my guests to leave the listeners with some advice on any subject that they're choosing. So what would your advice be today?
I'd say, when it comes to the cult, sometimes we all want something to believe in. Sometimes we can give our power away in a way that can destroy us. But maybe that's not so bad in the long run if we keep seeking and rebuild ourselves. What comes of life is what we make it. It's always in our power to shape what comes of our experiences. And that's what I would want people to take from my story is the value in your authenticity that's where it is. I mean, for me, my value is in being real. And I would suggest to the world that we could all use some authenticity. When we look at ourselves in the mirror, when we talk to each other, I think if we started keeping it real, I think the world would begin healing. And I think that would be a good thing.
That would be a great thing. And I appreciate you telling your story and making our corner of the world today a little bit better for hopefully a lot of people. So thank you for being here.
I hope so. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for the experience. This has been important for me. So thank you for your wonderful questions. To the audience, thank you so much for your time and for listening. And I'm glad that I could have been here today. Thank you. And check the book out if you like. Again, The War on Love, thewaronlove.com. Thank you so much, Melvin. This has been a pleasure.
You're welcome, Andrew. So please go to my website at podcastreallife.com for more information about my guest, including a link to his book and some of the things that we discussed today. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stories from Real Life. Don't forget to subscribe and share. Let's meet right here every Tuesday and Friday. See you then.